Today's daf we're going to be learning is Masechet Makkot Daf Daled. This is the daf for Shabbat, Erev Pesach. We're going to get started from, and we'll even have a reference to Erev Pesach today in the daf, which is always nice. We're going to get started from Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav. We're in the slew of statements that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, and Rav Kahana comes in questions. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, if you have three log mayim, shenafal letochan kortov shel yayin, umar eu kimar yayin v'naflu lemikvah lo paslu. So we need a little background again. I'll remind you of the background, which is we have a mikvah, which is less than 40 se'ah. Now, for a mikvah to be kosher, it has to have 40 se'ah. Once the mikvah has 40 se'ah, we don't really care what falls into it. But if it's less than 40 se'ah, since you can't make a mikvah with mayim shuvim, that means water that was collected in a vessel. It can only be water that flows from rainwater or a stream, but it can't be water that was collected in a vessel already. So because of that, the rabbi said, if you have 3 log of collected water, okay, mayim shuvim, which is disqualified by rabbinic law if you had a complete mikvah that size, but if the mikvah is not kosher, and that amount of water, 3 log of water, falls into that mikvah, because the mikvah doesn't have enough, again, if the mikvah doesn't have the requisite amount, and the 3 log falls in, it disqualifies the mikvah. Even if you add kosher water to it, appropriate mikvah water, it's already disqualified. The question here is, what if if it's only mayim shuvim that disqualifies it? It's not wine, for example, or a different liquid. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, 3 log of water that added to that water, you had a teeny little bit of wine that changed the color. And it now looks like wine, even though it's actually 3 log of water, doesn't disqualify the mikvah. And Rav Kahana had asked, why is that any different from meitzeva, from, food coloring in water or something like that? Exactly, food coloring, but dye in water. And Rabbi Yossi said that disqualifies the mikveh if it's 3 log, even though it doesn't look like water, and yet it disqualifies. So Rava said that's called water, right? Colored water. This is actually called diluted wine, and it all goes by the name. Because it's called diluted wine, it's not a problem. Now the Gemara asked, V'hatani Rabbi Chia, I'm still at the very bottom of Gimel Bet. Hatani Rabbi Chia, horidu et hamikvah. Rabbi Chia had an exact same case. 3 log plus a little bit of wine, looks like wine, disqualifies the mikvah. So how do we reconcile the contradiction? So Rava says, I'm a Rava lo kasha. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbanan. And for this we need to learn, we're going to say, Rabbi Chia's braita was one opinion, the rabbi's opinion we're going to see, and Rav held by a different opinion, which was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's. How do we know this? What's the Mishnah? Ditnan. Shlosha lugim mayim chaser kortov. Now notice this is different. In the Mishnah mikvaot it says, if you have 3 log minus a kortov, so it's not actually 3 log, but nafal letochan kortov yain. So now in the end, you had a little less water and a little more wine. Altogether, you now have 3 log, but the log mixture is not 3 log plus a little bit of wine. It's 3 log including, and that is included in that 3 log is a little bit of wine. Umar eu kimare yayin, and it looks like wine. V'naflu mikvah lo pasluhu. Okay, it doesn't disqualify the mikvah. Now the inference from this is, if it was 3 log of actual water, and it wasn't the case said here, but it was not missing a kortov of water, but it was 3 log of water plus a kortov, it would disqualify the mikvah. That's actually Tanakama's opinion, and that's going to match the bright of Rabbi Chia. The 3 log plus a little bit of wine, even though it looks like wine, is still going to disqualify a mikvah. So it's from an inference in this Mishnah that we're going to get our answer. The Mishnah happens to go on and explain, if you have 3 log of water missing a kortov, same thing, but this time, instead of falling in a little bit of wine, a little bit of milk falls in. Umar eu kimare mayim, but it looks like water because it looks like water. V'naflu mikvah lo pasluhu. According to Tanakama, that doesn't disqualify the mikvah because, again, according to Tanakama, all that matters is you don't actually have 3 log of mayim shuvim. As soon as you have 3 log of mayim shuvim, of this water collected in a vessel, it's disqualified no matter what. It doesn't matter if there's more wine or something else. Only if it's less than 3 log are we going to say, even though now we have another liquid that adds to it, it doesn't make a difference. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer hakol holech achar mareh. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says the whole thing follows what it looks like. So if you have less than 3 log of water, but there's a little bit of wine and it looks like water, that's going to be water. Or your milk looks like water, it's going to be like water, as if you have 3 log of water, even though you don't really. And once you have 3 log of water and there's more wine in it, right, and you add a little bit of wine, if it looks like wine, it actually won't disqualify. Okay, so he disagrees. So now Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says exactly what the Rav said, which is it all depends on the way it looks. If it has 3 log plus wine, but it looks like wine, we don't care that it has 3 log. Okay, whereas again, Tanakama seem to assume that this is only not going to be disqualified because it doesn't have 3 log of water. Once it's 3 log of water, it's a problem, and that's Rabbi Chia, even if it doesn't look like water. So now that's Rav's answer, which sounds like a good answer to reconcile Rav with the Braita of Rabbi Chia. However, they question now and they say, but wait, ha mibai bai la Rav Papa, but Rav, how could you say this? Didn't Rav Papa say that? Didn't Rav Papa question this Mishnah? Rav Papa had, and this is very interesting, Rav Papa had a suggestion that perhaps Rav had a different version of our Mishnah. Debai Rav Papa. Rav Papa said the following question. He wanted to know, when Rav read this Mishnah, in other words, he's suggesting that perhaps Rav just had a different version of the Mishnah. And then if Rav has a different version of the Mishnah, then we're going to actually see that according to version 1 is going to match exactly how we learned it. And then we'll see again. That fits with Rava, which is Rav holds by one position, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and the right of Rabbi Chia holds by the rabbis. But according to option 2, Rav is actually going to fit with both options, and we won't be able to explain Rabbi Chia at all. So that's going to be our question. And then they're going to say, so how could Rav have just simply answered that it breaks down like that? To Rav, again, one holding by Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, one holding by the rabbis. So here goes Rav Papa. So the first option by Rav Papa asks, Rav Tane Chasir Korto Beresha, which is the version we had, which is that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the 3 log was missing a quart of water. It wasn't a full 3 log, and then you added a little bit of wine. And then again, what did the Tanakhama say? Oh, it's not disqualified because it doesn't have 3 log of water. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says it's not disqualified because it doesn't look like wine. So if you have that version, okay, then everything's fine. And now we're going to just spell it all out, review of what we did already. Aval shlosha lugim letanakama pasli. But if it had 3 full log of water, for sure it would disqualify. Va'at Rabbi Yochanan l'meimar, came Rabbi Yochanan to say, what do you mean? No, hakol olech achar mara'eh. It all follows the way it looks. Doesn't matter if it's 3 log, if it's less than 3 log, with the added wine becomes 3 log. Either which way, if it looks like wine, we call it wine. The Rav Omer ka Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, okay, and then Rav fits with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. O Dilma, but Rav Papa suggested that maybe Rav lo tane chasir korto beresha. His version of the Mishnah actually looked exactly like Rav's statement and Rabbi Chia's statement, that we're talking, in other words, the case. The case that Rav and Rabbi Chia were both talking about was not where it was missing a little bit in the 3 log, but there was actually a complete 3 log of water, plus a little bit of wine. And now if we read the Mishnah that way, we're going to, and then Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, ki palik aseifa hu depalik. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri only disagrees then with the milk case, not with the wine case. With the wine case, if you have 3 log, let's just fill it in now. Go back to the Mishnah. 3 log of water, not chasir kortov. 3 complete log of water with a little bit of wine. Shenafala tochan korv tov yayin. Umar eyu kimer yayin. It looks like yayin, and it looks like wine. It falls into the mikvah. Both Tanakama and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri are going to say it's fine. Lo paslu. And the first case is just saying, if you have 3 log, but it looks like wine, even though it's a complete 3 log, it doesn't matter. It looks like wine. It's fine. That completely goes against Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia says, no, if it has 3 log of water, it disqualifies the mikveh, even if it looks like wine. Rabbi Chia is bright. It didn't care about that. So if you read that's the way that Rav Papa's second suggestion. Rav Papa doesn't know what Rav thought, but Rav Papa suggested that perhaps Rav thought that. Then we're not going to be able to answer Rav's question. Let's just continue and explain how Rav reads the machloket then between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the rabbis, because they obviously agree in a case of 3 log of water with a little bit of wine that looks like wine, no problem, because we're calling that wine. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri ki palig asefu hu depalig. He happens to disagree only about the end. Now, this isn't relevant for our discussion, but it's just explaining the Mishnah according to this version. Okay, so they don't actually explain it because it's not relevant to our discussion, but let's just explain it briefly. What we're going to say there is that Rav is going to hold that the Tanakama in the Mishnah is going to hold that again, if you have 3 log of water, less than a quartov, you add a little bit of milk, it doesn't disqualify. Why doesn't it disqualify? Because in the end, it doesn't have 3 log of water, right? Once it has 3 log of water, that's Tanakama's whole thing. It disqualifies, right? It's gonna again, now we're gonna have to actually, there's a little different than we said before. We thought the first reading, that if it's missing and it has a little wine, right? Because it's missing, it's not a problem. Once it has 3, it's a problem. Now we said, no. Once it has 3, it's a problem if it looks like water. So if you add milk, which kind of looks like water, because a little bit of milk is not going to make such a difference in the color. So here, what Tanakama is saying is, if nafal letocho kortov shel chalav, and it looks like water, then we're going to say it doesn't disqualify. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says everything follows what it looks like. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is going to say, one second, right. That's I missed it for a second. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is going to say that since it looks like water, even though it doesn't have 3 log of water, it's actually disqualified. So in this case, Rabbi Yochanan is going to be machmir in that case and say, since it all follows the way it looks, if you add a little milk and it looks like water, it's as if you have 3 log of water and we're disqualifying the mikvah. Whereas if you go by Tanakama, they're going to say, no, in the end, you don't have 3 log of water, so it doesn't matter. But again, that's not our point according to this, because according to this, we're caring about the wine case. In the wine case, it clearly looks like wine, and both opinions are going to think that since you had 3 log of water, but you added a little bit of wine, it doesn't matter that you have 3 log of water. If it looks like wine, we treat it like wine. It doesn't disqualify the mikvah. And then Rav is going to follow both opinions, and then we really have no way to explain Rabbi Chiya's Breita, because Rabbi Chiya's Breita was talking about a case where there were 3 log, and you added a little wine, and he said it disqualifies the mikvah. We don't know why. Okay, so basically, this is a question on Rava. How did you say so simply? This is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. That one's like the rabbis. When it's not so clear that that's the way to read that that's the way Rav read the Mishnah, and that's the way to read the Mishnah. So this is just interesting in terms of if you look more from a zoom out perspective, which is there were often Mishnayot with different versions of them, and there were different versions floating around. And Rav Papa had kind of a tradition, it seems, of possibility that Rav held by 2 different versions. And then you really have a problem. So now the Gemara is going to say, L'Rav Papa mibayale, L'Rava pshitale. In other words, when Rava gave his answer, it's because it was obvious to him what the right version and what version Rav had. Rav Papa was the one who had a question about it. Just because Rav Papa has a question doesn't mean that Rava had a thought that Rav had a different version of our Mishnah, and therefore Rava just read it one way, and therefore Rava answered the way he did. I'm Rav Yosef. Now, one more comment about this sugya before we move on. Lo shmi alei hashmata. I never heard this about this sugya about the whole thing that Rav Yehuda quoted in the name of Rav. Okay, there's actually a debate about what he didn't hear about, whether it's the 2 versions of Rav or he didn't hear about we'll go with Rashi. Rashi says he never heard this statement of Rav Yehuda that we started with in the previous daf. Okay, about the 3 log of water, that you have a little wine, it looks like wine. Okay, never heard of it. So he says, Amar le Abaye. He says, what do you mean? At amar le nialan. V'hachi amar nialan. Okay, what do you mean? You taught it to us. Now, this is classic. Rav Yosef forgot his Torah later in life, and Abaye had to remind him. So he said, what do you mean? You taught us, and this is what you taught us. Rav lo tani chaser korta beresha. You taught us actually that Rav didn't have chaser korta. You taught us the second version of Rav Papa in Rav's reading of the Mishnah. The Rabbi Yochanan a seifa palig, and that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri only disagreed with the second part of the Mishnah, the case with the milk. The Rav da'amar kedivrei hakol, and Rav held like everybody. So again, you could read this in 2 ways: that either he didn't know that Rav had a different way of reading the Mishnah, which actually sounds like a more smooth reading of this because that's really what Rabbi explains to him in the end. Or perhaps he didn't even hear that Rav made this statement at all. Okay, that's the end of the sugi. Okay, that was just an aside that Rav Yosef said, I never heard this before. And Rabbi reminds him, no, you taught it to us. Okay, next. Rav Yehuda, Rav, another comment by Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. This is the only one here that doesn't come with this question of Rav Kahana. Okay, another mikveh issue. You have a huge barrel of water, mayim she'uvim, that falls into the Yam HaGadol. I don't know, huge, but you have a barrel of water, falls into the Yam HaGadol. Hatovel sham lo alta lo tefila. Why? We're worried that when you pour the water in and then you dunked right after, that maybe the water didn't, right? We know water moves, but maybe it didn't move yet, and you're mostly dunking in an area of mayim she'uvim. And you need rosho verubo to be in a kosher mikveh. And maybe, you're specifically in the part that's right there that you dumped in a minute ago. They say, but dafka liyam HaGadol, this is only in the Yam HaGadol, the Mediterranean, where the water doesn't move so much. Aval nara ba'alma, but in a regular stream where the water is constantly moving, low. Okay, this obviously wouldn't be the case because even a minute later, the water's already moved on. Tanya Namihaka, here's a brayta to support it, and we're going to go with the girsa and Rashi, even though some people have a different girsa that it's water, not wine, but actually we're going to go with the girsa of Rashi that it's wine. A brayta says the same idea. You'll see. If it says wine, then it's not exactly the same, but it's a similar idea about really what we want to highlight is that in the Yam HaGadol, the water doesn't move so much in the Mediterranean. And because of that, we can assume that what fell in and what you went into is the same. If you have a barrel full of wine that falls into the Mediterranean, if you dunk there, it's not a good tefillah. Why is it not a good tefillah? So these next words are taken out by most people. But it's not shuvim, it's wine. Now, wine maybe won't disqualify a mikveh if it falls in, but wine is not kosher for toveling in. So if you tovel in that area where you just dumped the wine, it could be you're toveling in wine. Now, wine doesn't help purify you. And likewise, if a loaf of truma bread, let's say, falls into there, tamei, it becomes impure. Why? Now, why does it become tamei? Because the assumption is you're impure. You jump into that wine. You make the wine impure, and then the wine touches the bread, and the bread is impure. Now, we don't know the wine touched the bread, and we don't know you touched the wine, but we assume this is all based on the same idea that the wine is still there. Once you dump it in, because it's the Yam HaGadol and the water doesn't move so much, we can assume that you jumped into the wine. Again, that means it didn't purify you. If it didn't purify, you're still impure. That means you pass the impurity onto the wine, and the wine touched the bread, and then the bread becomes impure. So if we take the bread out of there, I don't know who's going to want to eat that bread, but the bread is considered impure. So now the Gemara says, my v'chein. Why does it say, and likewise? And it's, what are they teaching you here? We could have figured that out. So, I don't know if you would have thought about all that, but it's based on the same principle as before. So they say, well, you might have thought, and you might remember laws of chazaka. There's something called chazaka. Okay, chazaka means a few different things, but it basically means presumptive status. We have a presumptive status. Now, when I went into that mikvah, we don't know if I was tovel or not, if it was kosher tefillah, because we don't know, was the water shuvim, or was the wine right there? So we don't know if we can change my status from tamei to tahor. That's changing my chazaka. But in the case of the bread went in and was becheskat tahor. It was pure when it went in. So out of a suffix, we're not sure. Maybe the wine was, right, maybe it was a good tefillah, and then maybe it wouldn't become impure, the bread. Since it's a doubt and we want to change something from its status of presumption of being pure to presumption to then saying, oh, let's make it impure, maybe we wouldn't say that. And that's going to be the ma'oditema. You might have thought, it's not true, but you might have thought, hatam oki gavra achezke. There, we're leaving the person in whatever presumptive status they were. Before they jumped in, they were impure. They're going to stay impure. Hacha oki truma achezka. Maybe the truma can stay in its original presumptive status of being pure. Kamash malan, that's why they need to tell you it's going to be the same for the bread. It's much more strong. We're going to say, we really think you're really still impure, and the mikveh didn't work at all, even though we don't really know for sure. Okay, so what we did in this section, just to review, and then we won't review at the end of Daf, since this is basically, we're done with this whole section. We're starting a new Mishnah. we had two statements of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. One was the statement about the 3 log of, and they both had to do with mikvahs, the 3 log of mayim shuvim that went into the mikvah with a little bit of wine, right? Since the water was mixed with a little bit of wine before it went into this mikvah that was missing, right? Do we treat it as 3 log or not? And we don't treat it as 3 log of mayim shuvim because it looks like wine. How does that relate to Rabbi Chia's statement, who says it disqualifies it? So we had 2 possibilities. One possibility is we don't really have a good answer. The other possibility was that based on this Mishnah that we quoted, perhaps, right, the 2 opinions in the Mishnah there, because it has 3 log of mayim shuvim, one opinion says it actually is disqualified because who cares that there's a little wine in it? And the other opinion says, no, since it looks like wine, we treat it like wine. Okay, and that's the basic machloka between them. But Rav perhaps had a different girsa, which we saw both from Papa, suggestion, and also from Rav Yosef, who was reminded by Abai that he also taught that there were these 2 different versions, and he actually taught the second version that actually they didn't disagree. That wasn't the case the Mishnah was talking about. The Mishnah was actually talking about where it had 3 log plus wine, and it actually said it's fine because everyone agrees that once it looks like wine, we treat it like wine, and there's no debate about that, and then we really have no good explanation for Rabbi Chia. And the second thing we learned was this case of water falling into the Yam HaGadol, and you can't tovel in there because if it's enough mayim shuvim, we assume the water might stay in that place for a little bit, and if you dunk right then, you might be going into mayim shuvim, and it's a problem. And then we just brought up chizuk, a strengthened proof from that, from a braita that has the same idea with wine, and how the water in the Yam HaGadol doesn't move, but if it's a stream, it clearly moves. But moving on to the next Mishnah, and back to inyanim of Makkot, okay, of lashes and edim zomimim. Mi'idim anu b'ish ploni shechayav lechavero 200 zuz. So we have 2 witnesses testify about a person that he owes 200 zuz. V'nimtzu zomimim, and then it turns out they're edim zomimim. They were lying. So what's their punishment? Kasher samam lasot lachiv. But here it says lokin u'mishalmim. They get 2 punishments. Why? They get lashes for lota anebereh chayid shaker. So lota says you're not allowed to testify falsely about someone. And you pay because they tried to get someone to pay 200 zuz, and the pasuk says, kasher zamam laso la'achiv. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, there's a bit of a problem here. There's a few issues. We're going to get to them. But here the Mishnah says, Shelo Hashem ha'mevi'an lidei makom, mevi'an lidei tashlumim, because they're 2 different psukim. One gets you lashes, one gets you payment, and you get both. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's position. Chachamim omrim, kol ha'mishalem eino lokeh. Anyone who pays doesn't get lashes. If you pay, you're exempt from lashes. Now Rashi points out here that dichtiv. So Rashi says kol ha'mishalem eino lokeh. Why? This is because we call kimle b'derabamine, right? Kidei rishato mishum risha'a chata tamachayvo v'yet tamachayvo mishum shtei rishayot. You don't get punished for 2 bad deeds. Okay, only one. But wait, in Masechet Ketubot they say it should be, if you're going to get one or the other, it's usually lashes and not money. So why does it say here anyone who pays doesn't get lashes? It should be anyone who gets lashes doesn't pay. Usually you're going to get lashes and not pay. And then all the zomimim should pay and they won't pay. So they say the reason why, again, this goes back to the whole idea of edim zomimim, because the Gemara specifically said that edim zomim have to pay, right? They have to do kasher zamam lasot lachiv. It's a unique punishment. And that's why in this case, the money will override the lashes, even though in normal cases, the lashes overrides money. Okay, so basically we have a machloket in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says it's 2. The rabbis say, what do you mean? It's only 1. Kim lebed the rabbi mine, we're going to get the harsher punishment, or again, in this case, it's not really the harsher punishment. It's just 2 different things. Kedei risha achad, you're only going to get because of 1 bad deed and not of both. Okay, let's go on. Next machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. So now we have people who come and testify falsely, trying to convict someone of getting lashes. It turns out they were zamimim. Lokim shmonim. Rabbi Meir kishi tato. He says you get 2 sets of lashes, and here finally the Mishnah explains both the psukim explicitly, which I already told you, but it comes from here. Mishum lo tan ebereach hayit shaker, mishum vasitem lo kasher samam. Divrei Rabbi Meir. And we've seen in the Gemara where sometimes you can get 2 sets of lashes for 1 issue. So he says you get 2 sets of lashes. V'chachamim omrim ein lokim el arba'in. Say again, ein lokim el arba'in. And the Rashi points out it's mishum kasher samam and not lo tanya. Okay, and we'll see that in the Gemara later. Okay, so that's our basic machloket. Can you get two sets of lashes because you did two negative prohibitions, or pay and lashes, or do you only get one? So the Gemara says, Bishlam ala Rabbanan. Okay, we get Rabbanan, they're pretty straightforward. Kedei rishato, k'tiv. Mishum risha'achata tamachayvo v'iyat tamachayvo mishum shtei rishiyot. Here the Gemara says it explicitly. You did, right? You get kedei risha'achat. Okay, the pasuk says, Vaya im bin hakot harashad. This is specifically by lashes. V'pilo shofet v'kau lefanav kedei rishato b'mispar. Kedei rishato, according to the one thing he did wrong. Okay, but not shtei rishiyot. Ella Rabbi Meir, my time up. What's the reason for Rabbi Meir who says you get lashes and payment? Where do we have a precedent for that? Ula says very simply, Amar Ula Gamar Mimotzi Shemra. He learns it from a husband who basically gets married to a woman who told him she was a virgin, or the father said she was a virgin, and then he claims after the marriage that she wasn't a virgin. But he lies. And he basically pretends that she wasn't a virgin, and then she pulls out the sheet that shows she was a virgin, there was no blood on the sheet, and she basically ends up proving that he was lying about her. Now, what does he have to do in that case? Ma motzi shemra loke u'mishalem. Okay, he actually gets lashes and he pays. How do we know? Because the Torah says so. It says v'yisroto, which we already learned in Spencer or Moreh, for example. That means lashes. And it says v'anshuoto mea kasef. And then he has to pay 100 kasef. 100 shkalim. Av kol lokel mishalem. So from there you see, there's a precedent. We can say the same thing is true here. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. You can say that that doesn't set a precedent for our case. Why is that? Mala motzi shemra shekain knas. But motzi shemra is a penalty. You could say, right, a penalty is usually something you don't owe money. It's just a fine. So that's a fine they instituted. And then it's like a chumrah because you're not reimbursing someone. You're just paying them a penalty. So that maybe could go in addition to lashes. But in our case, you're replacing the money that you tried to get them to spend. Now, it's a little bit tricky, right? And we saw this before. There's a machloket whether it's knas or mamon edim zamimim. So they say, ksav Rabbi Akiva damar edim zamimim knasahu. Okay, the easy way to explain Rabbi Meir is to say Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva that edim zamimim is knas, and therefore we can learn it from Motzi Shemra because it's also knas. And therefore we can learn from, because edim zamimim is also knas, we can learn it from Motzi Shemra, which is also knas. But that's, okay, so we asked a question on Rabbi Meir. How could he possibly say Lokem Shalom? And we bring an answer of Ula that said we learned from Motzi Shemra. But some people say that Ula had a whole different, Ula's statement was taken out of context. It was really said in a different sugya. Okay, what's that? Some people learn what Ula said on a totally different topic, and here we get to Pesach. Titania, Lo totiru mimenu ad boker. One thing you have to do about the Korban Pesach, it's one of the unique korbanot, you have to eat it that night. You sacrifice it today, okay, on Erev Pesach, and you have to eat it that night. Forget about all the unique halachot of Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat, okay, which, if you remember, when we learned Pesachim, there was a lot to be said about that, but we're not going into right now. Here's the general rule of the Korban Pesach. It has to be, right, you sacrifice it in the afternoon of the 14th, then you eat it that night at the Leil HaSeder. And you can't leave anything over till the morning. What if you did? Okay, you have to burn it in the fire. What if you left it over? Do you get lashes? So this is what we call, in other words, a lavanitak lase. It's got a negative commandment, but a resolution to what you do if you transgress. So what do? You burn it. Well, if they already tell you what do, you burn it, that means, okay, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that teaches us that you don't get lashes for this, okay, because it's what we call a lavanitak laseh, and whenever there's some resolution to what you're supposed to do, you don't get lashes. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Akiva Omer, okay, remember, we're trying to get to Ula, and Ula's comment from the Motzi Shemra was about this. We'll get there very soon. So Rabbi Akiva says, no, the reason you don't get lashes is because lo tutiru means don't leave it over. Well, there's no action associated with that, right? That's just don't do something, right? Prevent yourself from leaving it over. If you leave it over, you actually haven't done an action. You just didn't do an action of eating it, but you didn't do an actual prohibition. You didn't do something actually. You just didn't eat it in time. And there's a basic rule. If it's a lav that doesn't have an action associated with it, you don't get lashes for it. So now they say, Michlal de Rabbi Yehuda Savar. Now, okay, this was to explain Rabbi Akiva. Why didn't Rabbi Yehuda say that then? Why did Rabbi Yehuda have to say it's a lav and itak lase? He could have just said it's a lav she'en b'maaseh. Michlal de Rabbi Yehuda Savar, lav she'en b'maaseh lokina lav. Sounds like Rabbi Yehuda thinks that a lav she'en b'maaseh you could get lashes for. Menale, where does he get that from? In comes Ula. Amar Ula, Gamar mi Motzi Shemra. He learns it from Motzi Shemra. Motzi Shemra is also lav she'en b'maaseh, because if you remember, lav she'en b'maaseh is also something that's just done with speech alone, not in action. All the husband did was slander his wife, but he didn't actually do anything. Again, it's hard to say that's not doing, but again, maaseh means a physical action, not speaking. So now, here goes. Ma motzi shemra, lav she'en bo maaseh lokina lav, av kol lav she'en bo maaseh lokina lav, and that's where Rabbi Yehuda gets it from. We're going to use motzi shemra as the paradigm to teach us that actually, against what we normally say, no, he thinks lav she'en bo maaseh, there's no action associated with it. You actually get lashes. To which the Gemara is going to start questioning this. Wait a minute. Mala motzi shemra sheken lokeo mishalem. But motzi shemra has a unique chumrah, stringency. Because in all other cases, we don't have lokeh and mishalem. You don't get lashes and pay. And motzi shemra, the Torah specifically tells you, v'yisroto v'anshuoto. That makes this unique. Notice we tried to learn that uniqueness to our case before, to the Eid Zomeim. But here we're saying, no, that's a unique chumrah, that from there we would say you can't learn anything from Motzi Shemra anywhere else, because this is a unique chumrah that exists. That means you can't learn from there to basically say lav she'en bo maaseh you would get lashes for. So Elam Rish Lakish, so Rish Lakish says, fine, you're right. You can't learn it. He disagrees with Ula. He says Ula's rejected. You can't learn it from Motzi Shemra, so let's learn it from Gamar Me'idim Zomimim. Let's learn from Edim Zomimim. That lav she'en bo maaseh you get lashes for, because look, Edim Zomimim, lav she'en bo maaseh, and lokina lav, right? Go back to the first Mishna number second. We have cases where Edim Zomimim get lashes, and there's no maaseh. So how could you say they get lashes if there's no maaseh? Must be lav she'af kol, right? So just like that's a lav she'en bo maaseh, and you get lashes. Af kol lav she'en bo maaseh, lokina lav. So any other lav she'en bo maaseh, you must get lashes. And that proves to us Rabbi Akiva's position, why he didn't say notar, leaving over the meat, is a lav she'en bo maaseh, and that's why you don't get lashes, because he thinks you do get lashes. And he just said, oh, it's a lav and itak lase, that's why you don't get lashes here. But if it weren't, you would. So now they say, wait, but mal edim zomimim, there's also chumrah by edim zomim, just like we rejected Ula, we're going to reject Rish Lakish. Shekain ein tzrichim hatra'ah. If you remember, edim zomim don't need to be warned. If they weren't warned, if you lie in court, you're going to get the punishment, then they're still going to get the punishment. Okay, they don't need warning. So what's the answer? Motzi shemra yochiach b'chazar adin lo riizeh kirizeh v'lo riizeh kirizeh tzad hashavesh ben lav she'en bo maaseh v'lokin alav av kol el she'en bo maaseh lokin alav. Now we're going to take, since it didn't work to prove it from motzi shemra and it didn't work to prove from edim zomim, let's prove it from the combination of the two. And we're going to say this. This one is not like this one. That one's not like that one, meaning they each have a tzad chamor, but each one doesn't have the chumrah that the other one has. So they cancel each other out, and it's not the chumrah that's causing the reason why you get lashes, which means we're going to go to the least common denominator. Both of them are lav she'en bo maaseh, and yet you get lashes. We're going to learn from there. Any other lav she'en bo maaseh, you get lashes. But what's the problem? But wait, both edim zomimim is knas, as we saw before, according to Rabbi Akiva, and motzi shemra is knas. So now we could say maybe only a knas that you get lash, right? That is without a maaseh, without an action, you could get lashes for. But if it's not a penalty, like for example, notar is not a knas, so maybe you would get lashes. You wouldn't get lashes. Sorry, it's not as severe, so you won't get lashes. Halo kasha, that's not a difficulty, because you could just say Rabbi Yehuda lo savar like Rabbi Akiva. You could say Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think, like Rabbi Meir does think, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that Rabbi Akiva is right, that edim zomim is knas. He doesn't view it as knas. If he doesn't view it as knas, then you have that problem that motzi shemra and edim zomim are knas, and notar isn't. That falls to the side. But but wait, well, it's true they don't have the same chumrah. Each one has its own chumrah. Edim zomim, it doesn't need warning. Motzi Shemra, that it's lokel mishalem, which normally we don't have both lashes and payment. And therefore, you could say both have a chumrah. So only a lav shein bo maaseh that has a chumrah attached to it. We don't care what chumrah, then you get lashes. But Rabbi Yehuda tzag chamor lo parach. No, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't believe that. He thinks that if one has one chumrah and one has another chumrah, just like we said before, they cancel each other out because it proves that that stringency is not what leads us to lashes. So we don't care that both have a chumrah, and that's how Rabbi Yehuda can learn from the combination of the two, the least common denominator. We learn from there to no tar that no tar gets lashes. And that we all brought just to show that what we brought from Ula before, where we were trying to prove from Ula originally, remember, we were trying to explain Rabbi Meir and what happened to Kedei Rishato? How could he say you get two? He learns it from Motzi Shemra, where also there's lashes and payment. Likewise, you're going to have lashes and payment. That's Rabbi Meir's approach. And then we said, but wait, some people say Ula was talking about something else entirely, which again connected a little bit because it had to do with Eidim Zomim also, but it had to do with the Lav Shein B'Maaseh issue, and it was totally different. And then it didn't teach us anything about Rabbi Meir here. Now we just have one last question for today anyway. V'Rabbanan, hai lo taneh b'reach hayed sheker, my dar shebe. So if the rabbis don't think lo taneh b'reach hayed sheker is to give you lashes, then what's it there for? It's used for an ashara. Remember, we've learned many times in Sanhedrin, especially you need, in order to get punished, you need a warning pasuk and a punishment pasuk. Kasher Zamam is the punishment pasuk. The warning pasuk is lo taneh. Well, now ping pong back to Rabbi Meir. If lo taneh is an ashara pasuk, then how could you learn a punishment from there of lashes? For Rabbi Meir, ashara leidim zomim iminale. So he's going to need an ashara from some other pasuk. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, nafkale me hanisharim yishma'u v'yirav lo yosifun od. Says in the pasuk about Eidim Zomimim that everyone around is going to see, they're going to hear and see what happened, and they won't do it anymore. Lo Yosifun is don't do it again. Basically, that's the warning. Let's just finish up to the Mishnah. So what do the rabbis do with that? Rabbanan, if the rabbis say, oh no, that means you have to announce it, which is what it actually seems like the simple pasuk is saying. Everyone needs to see, you need to make a spectacle of it, you need to announce that these people are being punished for being Eidim Zomimim. Okay, so you don't need that pasuk for the warning. So what's Rabbi Meir going to say? If Rabbi Meir learned the warning from there, Rabbi Meir maybe he says so there's two parts of that pasuk. Everyone is going to hear and see. That means you have to announce it. The lo yosifun od is the warning, and that's how we resolve the back and forth. So what we did in this section was we started with this machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Do you get either two sets of lashes or lashes and payment? And then we really were focusing on the lashes and payment. Where did Rabbi Meir get that you could do lashes and payment? Don't we have this Kedei Rishato, you only get one punishment? And they said Motzi Shemra is the paradigm for it, where you do have a paradigm where you get lashes and that, and you'd have to hold, since Motzi Shemra is a knas, that this is also a knas. However, we then read the sugya differently because the ula had to do with something else, connected with it, but not directly relating to our Mishnah. And that was the whole sugya we did there. And then we just had to go back to, well, then what's Lo Tanya doing for the rabbis? And from there, we had a bit of a ping pong back and forth with the psukim. How does Rabbi Meir read them? How do the rabbis read them? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Chag Sameach, a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. And we will, again, the Shiurim will be posted before the Chag for Shabbat and Sunday. And then on Monday, we'll be back to regular Zoom classes, the Shiur going up in the morning as usual. And so Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.